We have a former 33rd degree Mason revealing the darkest secrets of Freemasonry. Now, this is something that you guys should know about being a Freemason. First off, George Washington, the first president of the United States, was a Freemason. Second off, there are a couple different symbols that you should know about being a Freemason. And let me bring it to you over here right on Google. So, one of the main symbols of Freemasonry is the compass and the ruler. And within this, you're able to see that there's like a pyramid slash diamond shape. And this is the reason why you would see a lot of celebrities doing this type of symbolism. Jay-Z, Beyonce, LeBron James, a lot of other people, Rihanna during the Super Bowl, she did that symbolism. A lot of people are doing that. And then you'll also see the all-seeing eye. Like on the back of the dollar bill, you have the pyramid with the all-seeing eye. The all-seeing eye is separated from the bottom of the pyramid. This is basically representing the fact that whoever has been enlightened through going through the stages of Freemasonry and made it all the way to the top, they are enlightened. So they're no longer a part of the mass majority of people. And this is how they control the world. Realistically, they control the world through the money. This is why you find the Illuminati, the symbol of the pyramid and the all-seeing eye on the back of the dollar bill. You'll find George Washington on the dollar bill, another Freemason. And through the media, that's why all these people that are very, very famous, you'll catch them doing this type of symbolism. You can also find pictures of Jay-Z in the Freemason Lodge on the internet. It's not that hard to find. So that's why this video right here is going to be very interesting. The 33rd degree is as high as it can go from what we know and from what this dude that's explained to us knows, but I'm pretty sure there's definitely higher heights to the knowledge that you can gain in this world, because we know this world is really controlled by a small group of people, different families, but that's a whole nother topic. We want to see and hear what the darkest secrets of Freemasonry is going to be. And the last fact is that it's going to take at least a decade or two to become a 33rd degree Mason, even longer. So he's put a lot of time and work into this. And let's hear what he has to say.
I was like the youngest guy in the lodge by 20 years. And this guy comes forward and he says, we're going to lead you through this oath. But it's this long, involved, and ultimately blood-curdling oath. What none of these men understand is that deep down inside there's this very dark, evil energy. I would go up to these guys that have been in the Scottish Rite forever. And I'd say, okay, I'm now a sublime prince of the royal secret. So what's the royal secret? And again, this is something that probably only 1 in 1,000 Masons in America understand. Is that the royal secret?
Hello and welcome back to the Almost False podcast, where I interview regular people with incredible stories. Today's guest is someone who has explored the darkest levels of spirituality, one of them being Freemasonry. He became a 33rd degree Mason, was part of high-level secret societies, and he is not afraid to share what he's not supposed to talk about. So I took this opportunity to ask him as much as I could in the limited time that we had. No matter how much you know or don't know about Freemasonry, I can almost guarantee you that you'll learn a lot from this interview, as everything that is shared here is in some way related to it. Get ready to have your mind blown by Mr. Bill Snevlin as he shares a dark journey that him and his wife took and the unsettling things that they uncovered along the way.
And family, if you have any videos that you want to watch together, you can just comment it down below. Just type react to and then whatever video it is.
When I got to college, and again, I wanted to be a priest. This was a minor seminary college, Loras College. At the time, it was a minor seminary. It isn't anymore. I had a priest in my theology class who had a doctorate in theology, and he was teaching a course in Christology. Because again, I was wanting to be a priest. And he took me aside and he said, if you want to be a priest, in the Catholic Church, it's taught, sacerdotes est altus Christus, the priest is another Christ. So if you want to be like Christ, he says to me, do you want to be like Christ? And I says, well, of course. Doesn't every Christian want to be like Christ? He said, well, if you want to be like Christ, you need to do what Christ did. And again, that made sense. And again, nowadays we've kind of become suspicious about priests. But this was like 1968. And a priest was like God. I mean, whatever the priest said, that was it, And he said, well, if you want to be like Christ, you need to do what he did. And he went to the East and studied with the gurus in India. He went and studied with the lamas in Tibet. He went to Egypt. and studied with the magicians there. That's how he was able to raise the dead, to walk on water, to do all these miracles. So he says, what you need to do is you need to start studying the occult. And this is a priest telling me this. And so I thought, okay, now mind you, this is obviously decades before there was an internet. I mean, there was a little bookstore downtown. And I went there and I found a few scattering books on like the occult. And I found this book that was called Diary of a Witch by Sybil Leek. And she was one of the very first witches to, so to speak, come out of the broom closet. She was a British woman, and she was a medium. And anyhow, I read the book, and she was asserting in the book that witches were not evil, that this was an ancient pagan mystery religion. Among other things, she claimed that Jesus was a witch and his 12 apostles were his coven, along with their wives, So I kind of bought into that. And I found out about this guy, Alex Sanders, who was the supposed king of the witches over in London. I sent him a letter. This is around 1968, 69. And his wife sent me back a thing. Okay, here's a coven in Rockford, Illinois, which is about 90 minutes from Dubuque. I went there and I got initiated as a witch. And then later on, I hooked up with an Alexandrian coven.
It's crazy to think about, but lying is like witchcraft, because when you lie to someone, you're shifting their reality into something that is not true. You're shifting the reality into a false reality. And that's why when Jesus came, he said, I'm the truth. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. So it's like when you look at Jesus and listen to what he's saying, he's basically breaking down all of the lies that we've ever heard from the media, music, people, our friends, our family. And he's bringing us back to what the reality is of life.
In Boston, and I was made a witch high priest. Started covens in, first of all, in Dubuque, where I was, and then moved to Milwaukee because there was a fellow there who had an occult bookstore, because Milwaukee's a huge city. And he said, I've got all of these people that want to become witches. Can you come and teach them?
When we're talking about like you being in a coven and you doing witchcraft, I just want to make sure that we don't skip over that part. Like, what kind of witchcraft are we talking about? Because there's a lot of.
It was okay. Witchcraft originally, the kind of publicly available witchcraft was originally started by Gerald Gardner, and he came out, and witchcraft became legal in England. It was a crime until 1951. It was made legal, and he claimed, and all of this is disputed, but he claimed that he came in contact with an ancient coven of witches in the New Forest region of England. They initiated him and then made him a high priest, and he went off and initiated other people. Then there's this other bunch, this Alex Sanders fellow. He also claims to have been initiated by an ancient line of witches by his grandmother. So those were the two main fountainheads of witchcraft in the 60s. Both were from England, but both had, spread to America. And it was white witchcraft. Both groups, their rituals were virtually identical. And but the Alexandrian group that I was in was more into ceremonial magic, which is like kind of, if in like Protestantism, they have the distinction between high church and low church. Well, Alexandrian is more high church witchcraft, but we didn't believe in the devil. We didn't think we were worshiping the devil. We thought we were worshiping a goddess, a moon goddess, and a horn god. So it was like ditheism, if you will, two deities. And we didn't believe in demons. We just believed that it was all this nature, airy fairy, gathering herbs in the forest and dancing in the nude. And, it all sounds very innocent.
Yeah, and that's usually how it is, bro. Like, if people are not praying to the Holy Spirit, using the Holy Spirit, they're intermingling with other spirits, especially if they're tapping into the spiritual realm. They're intermingling with other spirits that's not of God. Or of a different
Except
God,
there's,
lowercase g.
especially in the Alexandrian rite, there's also some sex magic that's involved. So does that kind of answer your question?
Yes. Thank you for clarifying. I just wanted to make sure that we got that covered. So actually, let's go back to the occult bookstore that you were talking about, and let's pick up the story from there.
Well, so anyway, I mean, so we hooked up with this fellow in the basement of the store. We would hold these classes. They were packed because there were all these people. And again, this was 1972. And, there was all these people that are kind of like quasi hippies, and they wanted to get into the occult and magic and blah, blah, blah. The other thing that happened at the same time is that we encountered this fellow called Eli, who was a Grand Master Druid of North America. And Druids are a little bit different than witches. It's kind of like the difference between being a Baptist and being a Methodist, And we were invited down to Arkansas, which is where this fellow lived. He had lived on top of a mountain. He had kind of a organic farm there. And we went through the whole summer, got all this occult training. We were, high priests in Druidism by the time we got done. At one point, now understand, this fellow that owned the occult bookstore, he was kind of a manipulative guy who was very, he was older than me, very cunning. He told me, he took me aside and he said, if you really want to understand magic, you need to read this book. And he handed me the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey. And I said, well, why would I want to read the Satanic Bible? Witches don't believe in Satan. And he said, well, just read the book. And LaVey's contention was that magic is really about Satan. But Satan is like an archetype, he said. There is no real Satan, but it's like an energy, egregore, an archetype that you can draw upon. And it kind of made sense to me. And again, the devil was gradually pulling me in. Like the whole thing about the camel getting its nose in a tent, and before you know it, the camel's in there. So I wrote the Church of Satan, which at that time was in San Francisco. I became a first-degree member. And then later on, I went through some exams and studies, and I became a warlock, which was a second-degrry member of the Church of Satan.
Wow.
And at this also, I should say this, because this is critical. This Eli guy, the Grand Druid down in Arkansas, he gave us 2 words of advice. First of all, he said, if you really want to understand Luciferian energy, you need to join the Freemasonic order. And he himself was a 33rd degree Mason. He showed me his little certificate you get. He also told me that if you ever felt like we were in deep spiritual trouble, that I should join the Mormon Church, because it was a church that had been started by witches, for witches, that we could hang out in and pretend to be nice. The image of the Mormon Church. They're straight, nice, wonderful, all-American people with happy families and white picket fences and, all of that.
Wow.
But secretly, they believe almost the same doctrines that witches believe. And we can get into that if you want. But anyhow, so he gave us that advice. And again, this was in the early 70s. So I joined the Masonic Lodge, became a Master Mason at the same time as I was a Satanist and a witch. And only our inner circle of the witches that we by this time, we've initiated over 100 witches. And only our inner circle knew that we were also Satanists.
Mm-hmm.
And we were continuing in this, and I finally figured out that there was a deeper level of Satanism, and I got in touch with some of them. And again, there was no internet. We had to do all this by mail and whatnot. And there was a group in Michigan called the Order of the Black Ram, which is like more hardcore satanic stuff.
Bro, and that's the thing about Satanists. Like a real Satanist is not going to come out and be like, oh yeah, I'm a Satanist. Because they're following the works of the devil. The devil's not going to come up to you and be like, oh yeah, I'm the devil. Because that's not the way that he was led to the devil, realistically. He was like, no, like, it's cool. Like, it's nice. Just read it. Devil's not going to scare you away.
There was another group in Chicago called
Everything's
the
done in the dark.
Brotherhood, and I got involved with them because they were closer, because Milwaukee's just up the road about 90 miles from Chicago. And I got really, I sold my soul to the devil. That's how deep I got into this stuff.
Yeah. Before we actually get to that part, I want to make sure to take some time to talk about Freemasonry, because Freemasonry, it's very rare to actually talk about to talk to former Masons, because it's something that you're not supposed to talk about. So it's kind of an opportunity while I have you here to kind of, for me personally, to learn, but also for the people to kind of have a knowledge about what Freemasonry is. You said that you became a Master Mason. Can you explain how the degrees and the lodges are set up in Freemasonry so people actually understand what we're talking about?
Well, the basic thing is what's called the Blue Lodge. And that consists of 3 degrees: Entered Apprentice, Fellow Craft, and Master Mason. A lot of Masons never go any further than that. I did, but basically, it's like an initiatory process. The requirements are you have to, at that time, now mind you, this was, I think I joined in 75. You had to be a man, freeborn, of good report, and well recommended. So they asked you if you believe in God, and I said, yes, I did. And they didn't ask which God I believed in. They just, do you believe in God? And I said, yes. I didn't tell them that the God I believed in had horns. So anyhow, I went through there's this whole process. You do a lot of memory work, they call it. You memorize all of these ritual things. You have a mentor who's called your poster, who's an older Mason. And the guy that I had was a real, very kind guy, an executive in the power company. I can't remember the name of the company. And he helped me memorize all this stuff. And then you go to 2nd degree, and then you have a whole bunch of stuff to memorize. And just let me touch this briefly, because people ask me, well, at what point does Masonry start to look creepy? I mean, because there's tons of Christians that are Masons, literally thousands of them. And I just asked them, how can you do that? I mean, because when you start out as a Mason, they make you come to the lodge, they make you take off all your clothes except your undies. They put you in this like jammies. They're like, they're like pajamas. They're like, typically the one knee is bare and one breast is bare, your left breast, and I think your right knee. And you're blindfolded. You have a cable around your neck. It's like a velvet, they call it a cable tow. It's like a velvet blue rope. And you're tied up. And you're led to the door of the lodge. And you've got a guy leading you, because of course you're blindfolded. He knocks on the door, and somebody this is all ritualized. And the guy on the other side says, who comes here? And your guy who's guiding you, who's a lodge officer, he says, Mr. Bill Sneblin, who has been long in darkness, and now seeks to be brought to light, to receive the rights and benefits of the worshipful lodge, erected to God as all members have done before. And I asked Mr. Christian, Mr. Pastor, Mr. Elder, because there's, like it used to be, I don't know if it still is, it used to be 40% of the pastors in a Southern Baptist convention were Freemasons. And how can you say that you're in darkness when you have Jesus in your heart? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then, that's not it. You go into the lodge, you're led around, like they call it circumambulation. You walk around the lodge. They have these officers, the junior warden, the senior warden at the different, things of the compass. And in the east is the worshipful master, who's like the big cheese.
Big dog.
Then you're made to kneel at this altar. Again, you're still blindfolded. And you're made to understand that you're putting your hands on this huge, it's like a pulpit Bible, big King James Bible. And this guy comes forward, this worshipful master, and he says, we're going to lead you through this oath. And I'm not going to go through the whole oath because it takes like 5 minutes, but it's this long, involved, and ultimately blood-curdling oath. At the end, you say, you swear, the essence of the oath is to keep the secrets of an entered apprentice Mason. which of course I'm violating right now. And then at the end, you swear that if I should ever reveal the secrets of an entered apprentice Mason, that I swear that I will have my throat cut across, my tongue torn out by the roots, and buried in the sands of the sea where the tide ebbs and flows twice in 24 hours, should I ever knowingly violate this, my entered apprentice obligation. So help me God and keep me steadfast to the due performance of the same. Now, if you were a Christian pastor or whatever, wouldn't that kind of raise the hair on the back of your neck?
Nah, 100%. And also just having that person there that you have to make this oath to, that's called worshipful master, is almost already just dismantling your entire belief system as a believer in Christ or God. Putting another person as the position of a worshipful master is basically putting them as the position of an idol or in God. Because at the end of the day, we can only have one master. We can only have one Lord. We can only have one person that is going to lead our steps. We can only worship one God if we're being real with our belief system and being monotheistic. So that was like the worshipful master part is the part that I was like, you're not a worshipful master. You're another human being.
Yeah, I think it was raised the head on the back of the necks of pretty much most people just to hear that.
Yeah. And then at that point, the worshipful master says, my brother, in your current situation, what do you most desire? And then the guy that's with you, that he's a senior warden, says light, whispers it in your ear. And I say light. And then they remove the blindfold. And you see before you this big open Bible with a square and compass on it. And those represent the three great lights of Masonry: the Bible, the square, and the compass. And then they are revealed by the three lesser lights of Masonry, which are three burning tapers that are adjacent to the altar. Now that's the most mild initiation. From there on, they get more and more creepy. So I don't know how deep you want to go into this, but basically Masonry is an antichrist thing. It claims it's not religious, but it is. You know, they play around with it because they say, oh, well, we're just religious, but we're not a religion. Because if they were a religion, then if you were already a Christian, you shouldn't join another religion. Most Christians would say that. Like, if you're a Christian, you wouldn't become a Buddhist.
Right.
Well, Masonry is a religion. I mean, it has all the qualities. This is what I tell people. If you look at Webster's dictionary, there's three things that make something a religion, according to Webster. Number one, something has a belief in some sort of deity. Masonry has that. Number two, that belief is expressed in some sort of ritual. And Masonry is full of ritual. I mean, that's pretty much all it is. And then the third quality is it has a system of some sort of ethics or morality. And Masonry has that. So Masonry is a religion. And it's an antichrist religion. And the problem is that basically, if you drill down into this deep enough and read the books that are written by people like Albert Pike, like Albert Mackey, these are two, or Arthur Edward Waite. These are three prominent scholars of 19th century, early 20th century Masonry. And all of them were occultists. Arthur Edward Waite, he wrote a book on black magic and pacts, how to sell your soul to the devil. And in my book, shameless plug, this is an older edition. This is the first edition. It looks different now. But in my book, I document how almost every single leading occult person of the late 19th and early 20th century was a Freemason. They just go together like, love and marriage.
If people want to go look at these books, I just want you to like kind of give them an idea, because if they want to confirm that for themselves, what books are you talking about? What people are you talking about?
Well, There's Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. He was like the greatest Masonic scholar in America of the 19th century. He was the sovereign grand commander of the Scottish Rite, and he's buried in the Scottish Rite Temple, 13 blocks from the White House. So that's one. The other one is Albert Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. There's Arthur Edward Waite, who has a whole bunch of books on Masonry. Again, all of these are footnoted in my book. I mean, the last lots of pages of footnotes, because I'm not just making this stuff up. The other person who really you need to pay attention to in all of this, because he's more contemporary. Have you ever heard of Manly P. Hall?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was one of the most notable occultists in America in the 20th century. He passed away in 1994, I think. He was the head of the Philosophical Research Society. He was a very high-level ceremonial magician, and he was also a 33rd degree Mason. And he wrote this book, Lost Keys of Freemasonry. And in that book, among many things, he says that when you become a master Mason, you are like a warrior on the block. And that's kind of Masonic code. And the seething energies of Lucifer are yours to command.
So these are like the biggest Freemasonic figures that we know about today. And yet most Freemasons have no idea about this.
Yeah, because they don't read the books. They join the lodge for whatever reason. It might be for business, because see, it used to be that up until I think the early 90s, lawyers and doctors were not allowed to advertise. They couldn't put like an ad in the telephone book. It was like an ethics thing. And so the only way that lawyers and doctors could kind of build up business was by Masonry. They join the Masonic Lodge. They send referrals to one another, a good old boys network. So that's why a lot of people join the lodge. Many people join it because they had an uncle or a father or a brother who was in it. And honestly, unless you really understand the occult, it's boring. I mean, imagine the most boring church service you've ever been in. And having spent 5 years in the Mormon church, I can relate to that. But it's just, guys were sitting there snoring during the Masonic ritual when I was there. And, because it's like watching paint dry. And they go every week. And when I was involved in this, I was like the youngest guy in the lodge by 20 years. All these guys were like 50, 60, 70 years old, and basically they were there because they were buddies. And afterwards, they'd, play poker and eat, sandwiches or something. But what none of these men understand, I don't think, is that deep down inside, there's this very dark, evil energy, which is very sexualized. We document in the book how many men that have come to us over the years for deliverance, they were in Masonry and they began to be drawn into wickedness, into perversion, and even into pedophilia. And it's dark, dangerous stuff because it opens up unholy desires within the men. And then, because of the way the spiritual world works, that in turn percolates down into their family. And it affects the wife, who may or may not be involved, because there's a women's order of Masonry called the Order of the Eastern Star, whose symbol is a satanic pentagram, by the way. So anyway, it affects your children. So many men that were Masons, at first it didn't be a problem, but when their children started hitting puberty, they just started to go in various ways nuts because of this trickle-down influence of the Masonic Lodge.
Yeah, I actually interviewed a woman whose dad was a Freemason, And something very similar to that happened to her. So she was never involved in, the Eastern Stars. And as far as I understand, her mom wasn't involved either. But there was, an element of the children thing that you talked about with their family being abused, her siblings, sorry. And she also around puberty started developing, some weird things. So it does correlate with what you're talking about. But I want to make sure that people understand. I want to go back to the degrees of Freemasonry. You talked about the Blue Lodge. You also mentioned the Scottish Rite. There's the York Rite. Can you explain how that's set up so people actually understand what it means to be a 33rd degree Mason? Because I think there's a lot of confusion around it.
Well, it's a little complicated, but in America, English Masonry is different. But in America, after Blue Lodge, it forks off in two directions. You can either go to the Scottish Rite or the York Rite. The York Rite has 7 degrees. The Scottish Rite has 29 degrees. When I was made a Master Mason, I was told, because at that time, I believe it or not, I was going to the seminary to become an old Catholic priest. And some of my brother Masons knew that. And they said, well, the York Rite is the Christian path, so to speak. So why don't you go up that thing first? So I did. And the top of the York Rite is what is called the Knights Templar degree. Now, in the Scottish Rite, you have these 29 degrees. Some of them are really creepy. I mean, seriously creepy. They have one, I think it's a 19th degree, where they actually try to call up the devil. And finally, at the top, the 32nd degree, which is the Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret. And that's as high as most people go. If you're some really important person, either in industry or in politics or in entertainment, you might be offered to become a 33rd degree Mason, which is the highest degree in American Masonry. And many people, presidents, actors, I mean, people like, Roy Rogers, Harry Truman, all kinds of celebrities, Burl Ives, they're 33rd, or they're all deceased now, 33rd degree Masons, Gene Autry, many of these people. So that's the structure of it. And there's nuances in the York Rite that are very creepy, but the Scottish Rite is much more creepy.
Hey, I'm pausing here just to let you know that if you want more details about this testimony, whether you want more context about what happened before, or you have questions that I didn't ask, then consider joining us on Locals. We put out a bunch of extra happened after. Why don't you go check it out? It's free to join. Censorship, right? Kind of what 3 degrees, and then you have 2 choices, either the York Rite, which is 7, or the Scottish Rite, which is 29. So 3 plus 29 equals 32. So 32 degrees and honorary 33rd degree for people that are deemed to be important. So that's kind of how it worked. Only on the Scottish Rite, that's where the 33rd degree happens. So
let me just correct something.
Yes, please.
If you're a 10th degree Knight Templar, you can become a 33rd degree Mason, even if you never went through the Scottish Rite.
Okay.
Minor detail, but
okay. Thank you for clarifying. So, all right. Now we talked about the 33rd degree Mason. People usually are like, that's the highest level of Freemasonry that there is. There's also a bunch of people that talk about, there's secrets in Freemasonry that a lot of people don't know about, and you have to, be deemed worthy to be told these secrets. You became a 33rd degree Mason, and you eventually joined this secret group or secret order or whatever you want to call it. Can you explain what that is?
Okay. Well, beyond what we've just been talking about, over in Europe, there's what's called the Rite of Memphis Mitzrayim, and that is 360 degrees beyond what's, I've already discussed. And most Masons don't even know about that. Now, I got up to the, if memory serves, 96 degree. And because how I did that is there was a group in Chicago where they were involved with that thing, because Chicago was, and probably still is, a major nexus of Satanism. Most people don't know that. So this group brought me into Memphis Mitzrayim, and ultimately there was a fellow that flew over all the way from Paris who was the son of Pappus. Now, you probably don't know that name, but Pappus was a very prominent 19th century high-level occultist and ceremonial magician. And he wrote a book called The Tarot of the Bohemians, about tarot cards, And he came over and he brought me into the 97th degree. And this is where you get into the really deep stuff, the ideas behind sexual alchemy, how to supposedly live forever, all this creepy stuff. Anyway, I would go up to these guys that had been in the Scottish Rite forever, older men that were in their 60s. And I'd say, okay, I'm now a sublime prince of the royal secret. Whang, they did this initiation, and I was a sublime prince of the royal secret. I said, so what's the royal secret?
And we're going to leave that right there, bruh. We're going to leave that right there. We're going to get into the part two. It's an hour and 15 minute long video. We watched 30 minutes of it. Comment down below what you found most interesting from the 30 minutes that we've watched so far. I do enjoy reading your comments. Smash the like button, subscribe, turn on post notifications, and we're going to get into the second half in the next video to come. I love you guys. Peace.